From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Hello, I'm Lex Schroeder, and my guests today on the WLEI Podcast are Sebastian Fixson and Jim Morgan. Sebastian is founding faculty director of the DBA, or Doctor of Business Administration program, and professor of innovation and design at Babson College. He focuses his work on helping people and organizations build innovation capabilities. Jim Morgan is senior advisor on lean product and process development at the Lean Enterprise Institute, a former auto and startup executive, and co-author of Designing the Future. I'm delighted to have them here to talk about mentoring the next generation of lean product and process development leaders. Good morning. We're delighted to have Sebastian Fixson and Jim Morgan on the Design Brief podcast today. Thank you, Sebastian, for joining us on this Design Brief on mentoring the next generation of lean product and process development leaders. I'd like to start by inviting you to share a bit about your best teachers and mentors. When you reflect on your own career, who were some of the teachers early on that made a difference for you?
Good morning, Lex. Thank you for having me. Great to be here. Mentors early in my career, I think two people come to mind if I think about them, who have probably shaped my career without me understanding that back then. I think the first one would be my history teacher in high school, who had an almost uncanny ability to connect dates and otherwise individual data points to the larger story around them, which I found fascinating. And then a few years forward, in preparation for my engineering studies, I did about a year-long internships in production facilities. So worked on lathes and in assembly. And there was one engineer who helped me understand how the pieces fit together. In other words, I learned, small calculations in school, but I'd never, at that time, didn't realize how that all fit together for a big machine. So this one machine shop I worked in built these milling and grinding machines for asphalt replacement, to huge machines. And most of it at that time was really manufactured and assembled by hand. So I had just a tiny piece that was my job to do, but through him, I understood what role it played and why it was designed the way it was in order to function in that big machine and do its job. And so I think both of these people, maybe knowingly, but for me, it wasn't obvious at that time, but created context in which I could put what I learned into the larger story.
Wonderful. Jim, I have to say, I'm curious too. I've known you for a while, but are there particular teachers or mentors in the lean product and process development community that you'll always sort of be grateful to?
Good morning. I'm really happy to be able to join you guys this morning. I've been looking forward to this discussion. I think mentors play such an important role. And in my case, I've learned from many different people, but there's sort of three that stand out. The first one, similar to what Sebastian was just talking about, was a machinist that I worked for, Al Stoltz. He was a very demanding mentor. So at the time, I'm not sure I appreciated all the lessons that I gained, but he taught me the importance of precision. He taught me how important it is to really know your stuff, to not be a fraud, to really be able to perform. I think next, as I sort of went along in my career, I was a young plant manager trying to learn how to do the job, and there was a gentleman named Bill Morrison who taught me how to be a professional. And I think finally, and perhaps most importantly for me, was Alan Mullally, and the time that we spent at Ford, learning how to really be a leader. Not only learning through his actions, but I was fortunate enough to have monthly meetings with him where we would have the opportunity to discuss many of the challenges that we were experiencing. So, and that was relatively late in my career, and I was still learning from mentors. So I think it's a really important question.
Thank you both. So Sebastian, staying on this theme of learning, lean product and process development, I think is so different from how most of the world is organized and how most folks are taught how to build products, not to mention how to build strong teams. I'm curious, how have you gotten your own students or colleagues and team members to think differently about how to design strong businesses, build truly useful products, and cross silos to work together more effectively? Whether you call it lean product and process development or not, sort of those working with those principles.
That's a very good question, and I think it's not an easy answer. My thinking is to combine two things. So the one thing that Jim just mentioned, the importance of detail and the work that requires to do certain things well. And then connecting this to what I mentioned earlier, in the context of lean product and process development, I think the way you can think about this is that individual steps or tasks in that process do require the necessary care to be done well, but they also need to be viewed in the context of the entire value stream. So, give you one example. Research in the entrepreneurship space shows that one of the big reasons why startups fail is that they don't get what is known in academic circles as the product market fit right? And what does it mean? Ultimately, it is a misunderstanding of what creates value for the customer. How do you improve that? Well, if you spend time to get in-depth understanding of the user needs in their own context. In the design world, where I sort of spend some of my time, that is a big important user research is a big important piece of design research. In the lean world, the Kentau period has the same goal, right? Spend the time and the attention to truly understand what the customer needs, and then maintain this throughout the development process that doesn't get lost along the way when you have to make a gazillion type of trade-off decisions. So I think those aspects, combining the care and detail and individual elements with how the puzzle fits together, are two key elements that I try to help my students understand.
I read an excellent piece that you co-authored for MIT Sloan Management Review. The article was 4 Skills That Tomorrow's Innovation Workforce Will Need. And one thing I love about the article is the stance you all take about how leaders need to have many more skills than they used to, again, to have a more holistic view of the business. What's been most challenging in teaching, this next generation of business leaders and lean product and process development leaders to think bigger like this? Where do you observe that folks are learning fast or feeling really stuck and challenged by systems thinking?
I think systems thinking, to begin with, is hard. That is a difficult task, right? Understanding any complex system requires work and time. And I mean, large-scale technical systems can be very, very complicated. If you add a social element, a technology in a social setting, you add a whole host of even more ambiguous factors to it. The reason why we settled on this in this paper was not only is it difficult in a sort of static sense, but what we also observed that the increasing use of digital tools in the innovation process and in our world more broadly leads to rearranging of value streams. In other words, some jobs get moved into a tool. So a very simple example, if you think about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, engineering companies had large rooms full of drawing boards and people spending the entire day creating technical drawings by hand on paper. Most of this work is now living inside CAD systems. So it is still done, but in a different way, often by different people. And so what you see is that the responsibility of individuals, engineers in that value stream is expanding, sometimes moving in that value chain. And so in our article, we're trying to point out that in addition to understanding a complex system, now you also have to realize that these boundaries are shifting in the connections. And that's just a challenge we all have to live with. I mean, we write our documents now ourselves, what used to be done by the typing pool or secretaries.
So I guess related to this, thinking about the sort of unique moment we're in, not that there haven't been massive waves of transformation before. Jim always reminds me of that, which I think is so important. But, about this unique moment we're in and the digital transformations so many companies are going through. Sebastian, what's your advice to leaders about understanding both the physical side of the business, alongside the digital side of the business and how to marry those two? That's something we talk a lot about in the lean products and process development community. And how are you mentoring leaders to do this? And perhaps, how does lean product and process development aid teams in this effort of marrying the physical and the digital?
That's another difficult question for which I don't have a simple answer. I mean, we all know that the cadences and iteration cycles in the digital world are much, much faster than in the physical world, which is sometimes leading to more and more work being moved into the digital world. And I think in a number of things that makes sense. Having said that, as long as we are physical beings, we will live in a physical environment that requires all kinds of physical products for transportation, for housing, for all kinds of other energy production, etc. I do think the task is to figure out a way what is a meaningful synchronization or coordination of these cadences, right? That the two worlds can interact with each other in a productive way.
One thing you've also spoken about is the need for engineers to be better business leaders, to really understand how the larger business works, and like we've been talking about, have that larger systems view. Can you share more about this specifically and where you see mindsets changing around this, or perhaps not changing around this?
Well, it's funny that you ask, because if I think about it, it goes back to my doctoral dissertation, right? So I started out as a mechanical engineer, realizing that I didn't really understand why technologies develop the way they do, right? And obviously, a lot of economic factors played a role. And I ended up writing my dissertations about the connection between early design decisions and essentially an accounting topic, cost consequences, because those are numbers that play a huge role in technology selection decisions, etc. But though that connection, prior to that in my engineering studies, I had rarely, or really not really made. I think that problem in general has been in existence for a while, which is really a systems question. But the digitalization and the acceleration with more modern tools, and AI probably fits into that, has also another effect, which is, as I mentioned earlier, if work packages shift in the value stream because tool can make them faster or better or simpler, what also happens is that the value itself, where it sits in the value chain, is changing and new opportunities arise, right? And that has those two consequences. One, and in the article we talked about, quote unquote, bottom line focus, an understanding of ultimately what the business model is to make it sustainable and work, right? So in addition to the user value, you have to have a way to produce that value in a way that doesn't bankrupt your organization. But then you have also a dynamic element, right? So for example, if you now can put all kinds of sensors, let's say on an excavation machine, to in real life see how it behaves, where the problems are, where the challenges are, not only can you use that data to design a better version next time around, but you now also can think, well, what the customer ultimately wants to use is essentially excavation capacity. And if we now understand how this product can be used in an optimized way with optimized maintenance schedules, etc., there might be a new piece of value that we're able to create and offer to the marketplace. Again, you only understand that if you connect the technical aspects to the value that you created to a customer, right? And so in that sense, I think it helps engineers to understand the bigger picture and see where the value is migrating, that's where the effort and attention should go.
With young engineers, or perhaps folks that are kind of still on the learning journey with taking this larger systems view, what sort of unlocks it for them? What have you noticed helps folks begin to operate differently or ask different questions? Is it living it and having a coach? Is it a particular way of telling powerful stories about these ways of working? I'm just curious. It's not easy to take the larger systems view and to slow down enough to see where the value really is. In my experience, people want to run fast and just focus on kind of volume of work done some days. So I'm curious, what unlocks it for people?
I think that's another good and difficult question. I think every young generation is impatient, right? That's their right and probably their duty to be. But my sense is, if people understand the connections and begin to see them, then there's a reason for working on certain pieces that is much easier or much more motivational than rather than saying, do this piece
Mm.
100 times before and then you're done. Right. And I mean, there's larger discussion about the quest for purpose that the younger generation has. I think that's what we have to do. We have to show them the connection to,
Yeah.
if the purpose is further downstream, how is my own work in the system contributing to that? How can I help the system perform better when I understand what my role in the system is?
Thank you for fleshing that out. I think that's really well said. And it's a perfect segue to our next question, which I have to be honest, I'd love to hear from both you and Jim on this one. It's a short question. I hope it's an easier one, but how do you build process thinkers, not just product development thinkers? Do any stories come to mind of when you've, seen really great process thinkers emerge?
I mean, I would love to hear Jim's answer to this, but I'm always impressed by people who ask good questions, right? I mean, part of the problem-solving process in general, and recently I did some work on maybe measuring that better, is the quality of the problem you're working on. Right? And oftentimes we live in organizations, we face a situation that is a crisis or a demand that comes from somewhere, and we start working on it, only to find out later that that wasn't really the best question to spend our time on, if we had spent the time up front to understand the question better, right? And in conversations with people teasing apart the question, I think that automatically leads to what needs to happen to get to a better solution. And so that then can lead towards a process discussion if you really understand what you're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think this is another place where mentoring becomes so important, to work directly with new product developers, new engineers. I think there's a point of view around engineering that it's applied science. And I really think engineering is much more than that. It's in addition to applying science, it's intuition, right? It's art, it's judgment based on experience. It's a lot of tacit skills that are best passed along through sort of this journeyman apprentice model over time. And I think that's, at least in my experience, the most robust way to develop new product developers. And I think another reason for that is a point that Sebastian has made a couple of times, and that's this idea of providing context, understanding how all the pieces fit together and how your work is connected to this bigger value proposition. And I think a lot of times when that connection is lost, people then start to perform their jobs in a sort of maybe robotic way, as opposed to innovating and creating and collaborating. That's much more effective when you understand this connection between your work and the ultimate value that the organization is trying to create. And it also goes back to the question you asked earlier, Lex, about digital versus physical environments. And a lot of times there's many challenges there. The clock speed is one of them. Sebastian mentioned that already. The environments that people tend to work in is another one. But I think sometimes we get too hung up on that. And once again, if we can think about the ultimate purpose of the work that we're doing, of the product that we're creating, that is much more important than any of the sort of individual, disciplines that we bring to bear. So the disciplines are important. I talked earlier about how important it is to know your stuff, but it's important to know your stuff so that you can contribute to this larger sort of greater purpose, if that makes sense. So, and making that connection, I think, is sometimes best, or most times best, by living it and having a good mentor that can help direct you.
Hmm. I reflect a lot on how I had extraordinary lean coaches and kind of didn't know it for a long time, but that principle of being deeply aware of and connected to purpose and aligning a team around purpose was just sort of drilled into me in the best way. And I feel like it's informed how I work. And unfortunately, I think, there's a lot of work to do to create the kind of psychological safety or even motivation for folks to have that sense of real contribution and connection to what we're doing as a team. And I think that's an extraordinary gift in the lean product and process development world. Before we wrap up, another easy question, light question, Sebastian. There are so many challenges in the world right now, but there's a lot of good work to be done. There's brilliant people solving really hard problems, thinking systemically, working together. I'm curious what excites you about the future. Where do you see hope for innovative product development processes, or perhaps different types of organizations, or new ways of working to solve global challenges? Really, really light one.
If I think about my career arc, I spoke earlier about the history on one side and engineering on the other. And to this day, my two favorite type of stores are bookstores and hardware stores. But to your question, I think in my academic research, as someone who studied operations, we spent a lot of time asking about measurements, right? And so in order for any of the KPIs, if you will, that people are evaluated by, or business units, or any organizational structure in our world, in order to make that measurable, we use time, unit counts, things like that, and ultimately convert it into money. And that's important. But if you look at creativity, innovation, product development, there's lots of things we don't measure well, or sometimes at all. Right? But that doesn't mean that they don't count. In a recent study on that question, in particular around design thinking, I found the same thing. There's very little useful measures for practice to do that well. And I think what is necessary are two things that sound somewhat contradictory. But one is studying these activities more in detail to approach or improve our existing measures, but then also marrying this with the realization that there are things we can't measure because they are based on our human values. And these things have their right to exist and their right place in our world of work and in our society. And so the technology obviously pushes on both of these aspects all the time. And I think the current discussion on Gen AI makes this very visible. But at the same time, I think we humans have evolved and improved our systems over time. So that makes me optimistic, but I also see that it's a challenge to combine better, let's say, numerical values or measurements with our human values as guardrails, as placements. I mean, Jim spoke earlier about the value of the mentor-mentee relationship, right? I mean, yes, it's long experience that's conveyed and learned by osmosis, but a lot of it is also value statements, right? We do these things as engineers properly and in detail because that's what we do. Right? So I think that conversation between numerical values and our human values, that will continue.
Thank you. Anything you would add, Jim?
Yeah, I thought that was just a great answer, Sebastian. Not surprisingly. I think what I'm excited about is the opportunity. I think that a lot of the new technology has the potential to help us make stronger connections along the value stream, all the way to our customer, to more deeply understand our customer, as well as our colleagues who are part of the development process. So I think there's so much potential in this new technology. And as long as there's mentors to continue to steer us all in the right direction, to utilize these technologies for good, I think it's going to be a really exciting time in the near future.
Well, I just want to thank you both. You're busy people and such thoughtful people. I love this conversation. I think it'll be very useful to students of lean product and process development and design thinkers and business leaders. Just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. I enjoyed listening to Sebastian quite a bit.